Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 558. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, Linda, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am thrilled to have as my guest today, Linda Tai. Linda, welcome.
Thank you very much, Guy, for having me here with you today.
All right. So Linda is an adjunct faculty member in the social work department at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and she specializes in trauma-informed care and compassion, fatigue, resilience skills. Linda also assists internationally renowned psychiatrist and trauma expert Dr. Bessel with his private small group psychotherapy workshops aimed at healing attachment trauma. In her work at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, Linda is responsible for training clinicians in all departments, including psychology, nursing, and medicine. All right, Linda, obviously just a little bit about you, a snippet. But before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. So I was born in Vietnam, 1977, 2 years after the fall of Saigon. And my family are refugees. So we were part of the diaspora of Vietnamese boat people. Yeah. Lived in a refugee camp, sought refuge, were accepted into Australia where I was raised. And these days I live in Fairbanks, Alaska, so interior Alaska, on the traditional lands of the Tanana, the Baskin peoples. And so life has been this magnificent journey.
That sounds to use a hackneyed expression, that sounds intense. It sounds very intense, but let's get into it. I mean, before we were recording, you were kind of hinted at your journey, but that's really what this podcast is about. So how the heck did you get into this field?
Yeah, it's actually kind of neat because as a young person, being a therapist was the last thing on my mind. And for me, growing up in the big city of Melbourne and growing up in the suburbs of Melbourne, I had no idea that I was deeply traumatized and that my parents were deeply traumatized. All I knew was this sense of existential malaise, and that I just had to find the right boyfriend, the right job, the right leisure activities, the right amount of money, and then I'd be happy. And what I actually stumbled upon was Alaska, where I got exposed to a whole new way of life, where hunting, fishing, growing my own food, right? Raising animals, where I am directly involved in participating in the basic necessities of life, warmth, food, and shelter. And somewhere in amongst that, with what I know now, I was able to get out of that traumatized state of feeling ineffective and futile in the face of the world, right? In the face of toxic capitalism, in the face of being raised an immigrant in a country where it just takes multi-generations to get ahead in life. And in that journey of discovering Alaska, I then discovered meditation and yoga. And so with meditation and yoga, I got to then get more deeply into practices that stabilized my mind and got me able to stay with sensations in my body and emotions in my body. I start teaching in addiction recovery and trauma recovery, the skills and tools of mindfulness and yoga. And then somewhere along that journey, I realized that I'm starting to come apart. I discovered Bessel Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. And
wait, Linda, if I may, so how old were you when you discovered Alaska?
I was 27 when I discovered Alaska.
Okay. And what do you mean when you say discover Alaska? You just went there from Australia?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
I had traveled throughout my teens and 20s. I was like going on this spiral outwards of trying to find home because I never felt like I belonged in Australia. And yet I never felt Vietnamese either, because I'd experienced that fracturing from my home country and home culture. And so I just went traveling to see if I could find my people, find my place, find my gifts. And yet part of traveling was discovering myself as well as hiding from myself. Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm working as a stage manager. I'm waitressing. I'm living on the fringes of society. You're trying to figure it out. I go to an exhibition, a travel expo exhibition, and there was this unmanned stand that said, come and do volunteer conservation work around the world. And there was no one there. And I picked up this brochure that said, come to Alaska, do conservation work. And I was like, I'm doing that. Yeah, I'm doing that. And so I buy a plane ticket. I get on a plane. I get off in Seattle. I call some friends. They drive me to the ferry terminal in Bellingham. And then I pitch my tent on the rear deck of a ferry, tape it down with gaffer tape. And here I am, like on an adventure.
Wow.
Yeah. And I discover Alaska. I then got a choice because I landed in Juneau, and it's a whole different place. It was one of the first places where I started hitchhiking, because I'm like, the last frontier, everyone knows everyone, I'll just hitchhike. And so the cops pick me up and take me to halfway to wherever it is that I needed to get to. And then someone else picks me up, takes me the rest of the way. And so I'm outside of Juneau at this conservation centre, and they say to me, look, you've come from Australia to come and volunteer. And we've got these camps that are strewn throughout Southeast Alaska. Where would you like to go? And so there was Prince of Wales Island, there was Glacier Bay, there was Ketchikan, and every single place had a whole chapter about it written in The Lonely Planet. And I thought to myself, I've got no idea. And then there was this one place that said Yakutat. And I look up Yakutat in The Lonely Planet. This is 2004, and I'm 27. And it says, no one goes to Yakutat. Tourists don't come here. And I thought to myself, I'm going there. So I get on the crew that goes to Yakutat. Wow. While I'm there, I get totally deconstructed of all of the notions that I had grown up with in the world. I'm living on a tent on a beach. I'm living in a tent on a beach. I'm showering once a week. I'm shoveling gravel. I'm pushing wheelbarrows. I'm using power tools. And I'm like this chick from the city, from the suburbs, right? And it was fantastic. It was fantastic because I realized all the ways in which I was a construct of society. And that I could actually experience so much more contentment when I'm sitting there watching the waves roll in, and I'm sitting on my butt in the gravel, and I'm thinking about from one meal to the next, and it's almost like a hand-to-mouth scenario, and yet I'm embedded within the expansiveness of nature. I mean, the Wrangell St. Elias mountain ranges are in the background, and I'm just, wow. And the thing is, I nearly didn't go, because as soon as I found out that volunteering would involve working with disadvantaged teenagers, every single cell in my body said, hell no, not interested. And I was at that point in my life where I was recognizing that the strategies that kept you alive keep you from living. And that I had this thing, which I now know is a fear of intimacy. Yeah, but back then it was just this thing where I kept people at an arm's distance, and I didn't know how to let people in. And I knew that feeling in my body that says, hell no, was the trailhead that says, come this way. And so, I committed for 6 weeks to working with disadvantaged teenagers in an environment that was totally foreign to me. And I loved it. Like, I absolutely loved it. And it taught me that that the me that I thought I was totally constructed. And at the edges of that and beyond is this huge realm of possibility. And so I met people who taught me how to canoe and backcountry hike, and how to fish, and how to pick berries and make jams and jellies. And I was so happy. Like, I was so happy. And then at the end of that trip, I met a man and fell in love, and we had this 4-year bipolar relationship. And along the way, I cottoned on to the fact that there was something available for me. And yet I was still enmeshed in these sort of city aspects of the practicalities of the nuts and bolts of daily life. And yet here I was with a man who knew how to hunt and fish and build and fix and recycle and grow and raise and, you know, all of that. And so we bought 5 acres, which was less than $12,000 at the time. I was chief of finance, he was chief of engineering. We built a log cabin, costed less than $15,000. There was some dirt work. So for less than $30,000, we're technically retired because we own where we live.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the age of 29, we're both 29, able to step out of that toxic capitalism, right? Because living in the city was death by 1,000 cuts to my soul on a daily basis, the ways in which I needed to reshape myself to fit into the oppressive systems of society. And so we got to actually do that resting, that healing work, where one of us would work part-time or we'd take turns working, and we could actually just be. And that was where, throughout that process, my own addiction flourished. And I got to recognize the ways in which I was using the world to satiate my inner emptiness, the ways in which I was numbing out and escaping. My drug of choice was cannabis products, but I also used anything and everything in order to not feel the feelings that I would do anything to not ever feel. I fell into teaching yoga and teaching mindfulness. And somewhere along the way, a girlfriend of mine says, hey, will you, I'll lead the 12-step meeting if you lead the yoga afterwards. And I said, yeah, sure. Right. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I was an addict and I didn't realize I was an addict. And so in the process of sitting in these NA meetings, I start to hear people saying things that totally resonate with me. And yet I am gobsmacked because these people can talk about their feelings and talk about really raw and real and vulnerable feelings in front of all these other people. And I'm just wanting to cry. And then somewhere around the 6-week mark, I start to share that I relate to everyone here, and yet drugs and alcohol aren't my rock bottom, even though they're definitely part of my story. Because there was certainly this 3-year period where I could get 3 days of clean time, but then I'd, use again. Yeah. And then someone handed to me the patterns and characteristics of codependency. And I went, oh my God, that's me. And then through attending these 12-step meetings, and I'd lead the yoga afterwards, I got to practice the skills of noticing and naming my feelings and talking about them. And then 6 months later, I'm back in Bali practicing yoga with my yoga teachers. And I start attending Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous meetings. And it was like I'd come home, I'd found my people. Meanwhile, I'm still teaching meditation and yoga into the community here in Fairbanks, in outpatient, in residential treatment, as well as into the community. And so I'm having these parallel processes where I'm developing the community and the capacity for co-regulation, and accountability and responsibility. And I'm also butting up against aspects of myself that a twist or two of fate, I could have been there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of my mentors says to me, hey, Linda, have you ever thought about becoming a mental health clinician? And I was like, nah. Last thing on my radar. But then I thought about it. I thought about it. And then I started to get curious. And so I started to dabble. I started to take some online classes. And I really got to experience how much I'd fried my brain, like through all the drugs that I'd taken. because it would take me 3 to 5 times as long to read through reading material and integrate it and then write something about it than what other students needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to be curious about how could I make this happen? Yeah. And so that took about another year. And then I enrolled into graduate school. I did a master's in social work. But by this point in time, I'd read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that really sort of ripped that lid of denial off of me, because I had no idea I was a trauma survivor. Yeah. And yet, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then maybe it's a duck. And I had been living my entire life, in survival. And so while I'm in graduate school, I get trained in all the modalities that Bessel talks about. I start attending his workshops at Esalen for a week every year. I start working on my own stuff, and I start becoming aware of the lay of the land in terms of trauma treatment and trauma therapists. At some point along the way, I get to do my own psychodrama through Bessel's, psychodramatic workshops, where you're dealing with your own deep attachment wounds. Another piece of myself comes home to me. And then I realized that the name of this game is actually not to be a trauma therapist. It's just to do my own healing work. Yeah. And I think I was only in my first or second year of graduate school when I had that realization. And that's when I knew that IFS training, Brainspotting training with Bessel and his modalities, Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, Havening Touch, all the other trainings I've done since then, it's actually about me. Yeah. And then if I get to do this work out into the world, it's a bonus. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so by the time I finished graduate school, I've done all these advanced trauma trainings, I've got my bit of paper, and I'm actually burnt out. And the best piece of advice I was ever given was from your colleagues 20 years my senior, at the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy trainings, and all these clinicians turned around and said to me, if you can take 6 months to a year off at the end of graduate school, do it. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, because my nervous system was just like so up here, because graduate school is, it's an inch deep, but 2 miles long. Yeah. And my nervous system was just like going so hard by this point in time that I was so grateful for their advice, because I wouldn't have done it. And so the circumstances arose as such that I was able to take off, 6 months, actually probably 12 months at the end of graduate school. And I saw my nervous system just like decompressing this whole time. And running parallel to that, I'm still doing my training in sensorimotor psychotherapy. I'm doing workshops out in the world, but I'm not doing any clinical work. And I am just appreciating this space where I can take care of me. And so by the time I end up falling into clinical work, I'd already figured out who I am and how I want to live. And then anything I do on top of that, it has to overlay on top of how I want to live. And so I look back on my life and I feel ever so grateful for that meandering, right? The stumbling and bumbling, where I was able to step out of the throes of toxic capitalism, to be able to own where I live, to have a husband who hunts and fishes, and we go cut our own firewood. And when COVID went down, we had $300 in the bank, but a wood full of woodshed and 2 freezers full of food and 50 pounds of flour and 50 pounds of rice. And we're like,
we're good.
We're good. Yeah. And all of that breathing room. Yeah. All of that breathing room allowed me to take more steps back, to be able to recognize the ways in which we live within systems of oppression, systems of violence, Yeah. And the privileges and the blessings that I've had to be able to pause, to deconstruct my own story, to be able to look at and really hold space for the grief around intergenerational trauma and systemic trauma and the trauma of colonization, which was the furthest thing on my radar, when I picked up this book, right? Because when I picked up this book, I had no idea what the cause and the source of my own suffering was. And even when I went through all these trainings and I used them to do that deep work on myself, it was still all about, how do I not feel the feelings that I would do anything to not feel? Yeah.
Your story sounds like such a powerful healing journey in and of itself. I mean, it sounds like a very powerful tutorial for trauma therapists, for therapists who work with people who've been traumatized in and of itself. What I found interesting, one of the things that you said, Linda, was that you were getting into all these different modalities, and you learned at some point that wait a minute, this is about me.
Yes. It happened actually during my IFS training. I think I was in my first year of graduate school and I signed up for internal family systems training. And it was a training where in order to learn the modality, you practice on each other. And so I got to do the work in here in terms of my own parts of self. And what I got to see was most of the clinicians were in private practice and had been so for a while. And yet about a third to a half of the clinicians were like, what? Do the work of myself? Yeah. And that's when I realized that, this is part of what goes on in the profession. Yeah, is that we do modalities to others. And me as a trauma survivor, I've always had that spidey sixth sense that is, there's something not quite right here. And now I'm having the experiencing of that. And I got to see how some of the most traumatized people out there are actually therapists. And here's the opportunity to do that work on ourselves. And the opportunity to build a container within which to do that work on ourselves. And that can be through internal resourcing or through the workshop participant container itself. And that's where I took that big deep breath and I stepped into the 10 years of mindfulness and yoga practice that I'd done before that and did that self-resourcing, and I just went there. Yeah, because I wanted to learn from the inside out and I wanted to do that work for myself. Because by this point in time, I was aware through teaching meditation and yoga in addiction recovery and trauma recovery that my own stuff was coming up. Yeah. And I needed to find ways to work on it. And yet living in central Alaska, there's no one here who's trained in IFS, right? There's no one here who's trained in sensorimotor psychotherapy, right? We've got some Brainspotting and EMDR clinicians, and yet, this is, when was this? This was 2016. So this is like 5 years ago. So it's still recent, and yet the running joke here in Alaska is that Fairbanks is 15 years behind Anchorage, and Anchorage is 15 years behind the rest of the country, right? And if I'm going to be a pioneer in the field in terms of bringing this advanced trauma treatment here to Fairbanks, there needs to be that integrity and that authenticity that I've experienced the power of it from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And it was excruciating. Like it was excruciating. And yet holding my own feet to the fire allows me to have that real sense of empathy and compassion for how hard it can be.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, it's very interesting for me to listen to you speak because you seem to lead with the the importance of one's own experience and honoring one's own journey, um, and trauma, and how significant that is within the context of working with other people who've been impacted by trauma. So what do you teach now? What kind of courses how do you teach now? I guess
Yeah.
that's my question.
Yes. I love to lead through psychoeducation. Yeah, I believe that it's a very non-pathologizing way of opening up that space of awareness. Yeah. So I'm not talking to you about you. I'm just talking in general. And then, the person listening can integrate or apply that into your own lived experiences in the ways that fit for you for right now. Because we know with trauma survivors, there's that sense of sensitivity towards being attacked or towards being criticized or shamed. And so to just, put something out there and for you to then resonate with it in the ways that feel appropriate for you. And so a lot of the public classes and courses that I teach just take that approach.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people who attend the classes are therapists who'd like to learn more about the nervous system and the body and how trauma is held in the body, as well as trauma-savvy trauma survivors who, for whatever reason, and there's a multiplicity of them, aren't able to access or would prefer to access, healing through education. Yeah. We know that there's a shortage of trauma therapists. We know that everyone's got a wait list.
Mm-hmm.
And so to empower people to learn, and to cultivate that capacity to learn and grow. I mean, it was my own journey to healing was by reading books about trauma. And I see this as I travel, around, I meet other trauma-savvy trauma survivors for whom their healing journey has been through reading, through podcasts, through learning. And so it's a population that I love to speak into and towards, because it can be a long journey before one is ready to step into trauma therapy. Yeah. And not everyone's able to access that.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
I'm,
Not
I'm, I'm
everyone's able to.
resonating a lot with what you're saying because, as I've shared before, when I got into graduate school, I was kind of older. I was 36, and I had, had experience with therapists, and I kind of thought, mistakenly and naively that I kind of had my stuff together, right? So my goal when I was in graduate school and I knew I wanted to pursue trauma I thought that I just needed to take all this information in, what do you mean I need to work on myself? I kind of did that already. And I was just so mistaken. And I, didn't realize kind of exactly what you're talking about, how important it was and is to be able to look at oneself. I had been bullied as a young kid, but I didn't really understand the impact of that, and hearing you talk about your journey and the depth in which you're doing, I think a lot of people listening to this are really going to be moved by it and hear how it's really impacted the way you're able to work with other people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's something I found so incredibly rewarding about being in the world of trauma survivors. We're all trying to find our own way to our own healing, whether it's through 12-step or through ecstatic dance or through yoga or through meditation or through art or through living in the woods. Yeah. That there isn't this pre-packaged, this is the solution for you, because each person has their own path and their own journey. And this is something that I butt up against sometimes in the world of trauma therapists, is this sense of my modality is the modality.
Mhm.
They become, as Bessel van der Kolk says, religious fanatics to the one tool that they have in the toolkit. And my gratitude for my own lived experiences and journey through healing has allowed me to have a more expansive sense of that we're all on this journey. Yeah. And just because that didn't work for me, or because I don't get that, doesn't mean that it's not valid for that person. Yeah. And to tie that back into what you were saying in regards of doing one's own work, it's like in marriage counseling, right? I'm not married to myself. I'm married to my husband, Caleb. Yeah. And yet when I'm traumatized, I don't see the world as the world is. I see the world as I am. Yeah. And my ability to take care of my own trauma allows me to be with the other person, see their view of the world while remaining grounded in my own, body and sense over here. And in the meantime, I get to also then witness all the things that come up that runs interference with all of that. And now I have the tools and the skills to be able to work that through in such a way that allows me to once again, hold a bigger frame for the other person's journey and experience, which will be different from my own, because that's how it works.
You said that when you were in one of those trainings, and there were a lot of seasoned therapists, many of whom were in private practice, they were kind of taken aback. A lot of them were taken aback when they realized that, wait a minute, I'm being called to kind of look at myself. And do you still feel that a lot of clinicians feel that way, or a lot of newer therapists feel that way, that wait a minute, I'm coming here to help someone else. I got to work on myself.
Yeah. It's curious because I think it was Brainspotting and then IFS and then Sensorimotor Psychotherapy. Like, that was the order of the trainings that I did. And all of them require that you do the work on yourself, or you practice on yourself and on each other. And recently I attended a training where there was none of that. It was just like learning skills and tools that you then do to your clients. And I'm like, holy shit, like, this is like, oh, this is how trainings work. And that then gave me a bigger context for, how trainings may have been in the past. Mm-hmm. And I had the fortune of falling into trainings where we got to do one's own work. So that allowed me to have a space of graciousness that people may not have actually experienced experiential trainings before. Yeah. I also get that healing is a lifelong thing. In that moment, I needed to grieve. Yeah. Because my view of therapy and therapists was that it was people that all had their stuff together. Yeah. And so there was that moment of grief, like, oh my God, you don't. Right. And then I noticed the part of me that wants to judge and that wants to criticize, and then wants to be self-grandiose, and then to just put all that to one side and go, I'm just going to do my own work and swim in my own lane. Yeah. And therapists are human too. Yeah. And we also need a space to do our own work, and a space within which to uncover, to recover, to heal, to grow. Yeah.
So you, I mentioned in the bio that you're working in the university, right? Mm-hmm. Are you currently seeing clients privately?
Yes.
You are? Okay.
Yes.
So if people, are you doing it online or just in person?
I'm doing in person as well as online. So to dance within the lines of our profession. Yeah, I see psychotherapy clients within ND systems here in Fairbanks, Alaska. And then I have a coaching, consulting and education side of my life. Yeah. And so within that realm, It's coaching, consulting, and education, and not psychotherapy. And so within that realm of life, I'm able to see folks from all over the world, whereas psychotherapy is individuals who reside here in Alaska.
Got it.
Yes.
All right, Linda, as we kind of wind down here, I know you mentioned, Bessel's book. Is that the one you want to use as your go-to book recommendation? The Body Keeps the Score?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it is definitely my go-to recommendation for folks working at that individual level. My go-to book for folks who are wishing to have a bigger frame for looking at trauma is The Politics of Trauma. Yes, Stacey Haynes. Yeah.
Okay.
Where we look at trauma from a structural perspective.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a previous guest on the podcast also, Stacey
Wonderful.
Haynes.
Yes.
All right, awesome. So I'll have those both listed up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Linda, I got to say, it's a breath of fresh air talking to you. It really is. And let me just take a drink of water. And I'd love to have you back.
Yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate you and just the way you're sharing your story, and resonates a lot with me and what I hope this podcast is about. So I really appreciated you coming on here today.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. It's my hope that individuals who have lived experiences of trauma and of healing through their trauma start to infiltrate into all professions, including the psychotherapy profession. And within the psychotherapy profession, there does seem to be a sense of judgment or even ostracizing of therapists actually stepping into and naming their own lived experiences.
Still?
Yes, still.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, therapists who get shamed for saying, I've recovered from borderline personality disorder, or I experienced myself on the dissociative spectrum. Yeah. And I feel that that's something that we need to address as a profession, because people who have the lived experiences and have the connections into those communities are the ones who are going to come up with the next advances in the treatment of trauma.
Well, again, it was a pleasure having you on here, and love to have you back. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right.
Pleasure today.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.